here today. This session is going to look at innovation by the private sector and in food systems and how that can be aligned more closely towards climate goals. And really excited to be here today. My name is Danish Dinesh. I'm the founder of Climate. So Climate is running the sessions in this pavilion today, which is all focused on innovation in food systems. So earlier we talked about innovation in African countries. Now we'll talk about private sector. We'll be talking later about financial innovation, trade innovation, so different dimensions of innovation today in the food systems pavilion. And to do that, to facilitate this discussion, we have a paper. We don't have very many. If you stay till the end, you'll get a copy. It's called Picking Locks for Potentials. So it thinks about, what's locking in the innovation pipelines in the private sector, and how can we actually pick those locks. We only have like 15 copies, so if you stay, you get it. If not, you can go to a website and get a digital version. So Climate's been working on this topic, and my colleague Liane will be presenting with the key findings, the approach, and so on. But the idea is we can kick off a discussion, because this has just not been a hot topic at the COPs. We are talking very much about the same things for the last 8 COPs that I've been going to. So how can we really think about like new topics and what can be really game changing? And we know that the private sector is investing considerable amounts of money. The World Bank estimates around 13, 14 billion a year on innovation. And this is a huge opportunity if we can think about how can this be directed towards climate goals. And that's what we want to get started here. This will be the starting point, and this is a draft, and we want to get your inputs while we are at COP, and the idea is that the final paper, it'll be launched in Davos in January on the 17th. So there's a pathway that you can all contribute to. But so to kick us off, one of the things I've noticed is that last year, for the first time, we had a food systems pavilion, which is great, and now we have lots of food pavilions. But I also noticed that we are kind of creating silos. We are here, the food people, we talk to each other, we go to the next pavilion, talk to our other friends there, but we're not talking to the energy people or the built environment people and so on. So we actually have a speaker who's going to inspire us, maybe with some reflections on how the innovation agenda is being approached in other sectors, especially fashion. So I'd like to invite Leslie Johnston, the CEO of the Lotus Foundation, to set the scene.
Great, thank you.
Yeah.
Good
It's
to be
very
here.
cozy.
It is cozy. Let's do a little dance. All right, thank you. So it's great to be here amongst foodies. This is actually a sector I don't get a chance to connect with very often. So I'm going to talk about something that actually sounds a little bit wacky, because we're here to talk about food, but the other side of food is fiber. In fact, it's food, fiber, and fuel. So when we look at that nexus and even the tension across the three, the work that we're doing in fashion as Lotus Foundation actually touches on food in many ways, and I can talk about that. But what I wanted to do was, first of all, stress that we're here to talk about innovation and private sector-led innovation. What we learned in fashion is it's not easy. It takes time, and it actually takes a lot of concessionary capital to kind of get that going. So I'll give you an example of what I mean. But we also see in food is an area that we're exploring, and as Lotus Foundation, we recently came together with 24 other philanthropies doing a public call for more investment in regenerative systems. I don't know if you saw that. That was with the Global Alliance for the Fashion of Food, because there is a big finance gap, and we understand that. What we learned in fashion is not all about money, but money is needed. So let me tell the story. So as a philanthropic foundation, Lotus loves innovation. We see it as a really important lever for trying to change business as usual. We also love working with business and industry, because ultimately it's industry that's going to drive the change. We see more movement through the private sector and through investment than you may see in policy. Although policy is absolutely critical, it just has a lag of when it can actually catch up. So why am I saying this? Well, when you look at the fashion industry, this is a very challenging industry. It's very much a take, make, waste structure. A lot of waste, a lot of water, a lot of carbon, 10% of emissions. And business as usual in terms of the business model will not address that. We will not address the problems in fashion by just continuing to run out many pieces that are being pushed out in the volumes. So how do you address that? Well, innovation is one lever. But here's the challenge with innovation, and maybe it's the same in food. Would love to hear from you. In fashion, innovation is core to one's competitive edge. I mean, think of Nike, think of Adidas, think of all these shoes that are different every season. They're pumped with air, or they're made from bottles, or they're compostable. I mean, all these things are innovation, and it's really unusual for a brand to actually share its secrets around innovation with other brands, but you need it. So what we ended up doing as Loudis is we set up a platform called Fashion for Good, which effectively was an objective platform that brought the innovators together with the brands. So it was a matchmaker. How do you bring the market together with the supply? And why did it work? Let me give you a couple stats first. Fast forward 6 years. The brands that sit around the table at Fashion for Good represent 12% of the fashion industry. Fashion for Good has worked with 165 innovators thus far. They've done about 350 pilots in their supply chains. And most importantly, they've unlocked 1.1 billion euros in investment in those innovators. They've made them investable, and they've unlocked other people's money to put money into it. So why did this work? So I think, first of all, you need someone to take some risk. So I think that the role of philanthropy, and it doesn't have to be philanthropy, concessionary capital, it could be government, comes in to take a risk. You need to create a platform where you actually don't compete, but you collaborate. And what I found when I look at the kind of key success factors of Fashion for Good, there's actually 4 things that I think have worked. One was that matchmaking I talked about, linking innovators with demand. That created the value proposition for innovators to be there. It made it attractive for the brands to be there. 2, testing. One thing Fashion for Good does is it orchestrates in the supply chains of brands how to bring these innovations into the chains. And that's not easy. I mean, think of an innovation like blockchain to create more traceability around organic cotton. Where do you start? Like, that's just crazy to think about if you're a brand. How do you actually put this in place? So Fashion for Good would hold the hands to kind of bring those together. Third thing is showcasing success. So what Fashion for Good has done very well is shined a light on those brands, the successes they've had, but more importantly on the innovators and what they've been able to achieve. And then finally, money. I mentioned 1.1 billion. It's not a small number, but you need financing, and you need financing at every stage. When we set up Fashion for Good, we actually set it up with a seed fund, so it invests about $1 million a year into innovators, but that gets them ready for Series A, Series B, and to grow from there. So the real secret, though, the secret sauce of Fashion for Good, goes to what I was saying at the beginning, which is we've been able to take a very competitive thing, innovation, and drop it into the pre-competitive space. And we've created a safe space where brands can sit around the table, and it is phenomenal. I've been at the table where you have big brands comparing notes on plant-based leathers. And that is something I've never seen before. I mean, for businesses in the room, would you share your R&D secrets with your competitors? Probably not. So bringing that in the pre-competitive space is important. And that also opens up the opportunity for accessing finance, scaling, and ultimately changing the way that business works. So that's our story. I hope some of that is applicable to this industry. I think this industry is a little bit more complicated than fashion. It's bigger, it's more fragmented. But I think these elements around using concessionary capital, taking a bet, matchmaking, but then also creating that safe space to test, replicate, and scale, hopefully would be useful. So thank you very much. Can I also say one more thing? Sorry, I meant to say this. We're supporting Climate, which is really important because we're actually learning about the food industry. It's not an area that we're yet working in, but we're very inspired by your work. So I am here as a very small donor to your work, but hopefully a bigger player in the food industry in the future. So thank you.
Thank you, Leslie, and thank you for your support, which has made this work possible. Because in food systems, there are lots of important questions, and not all of them are being answered. So it's important to address those questions which are not so easy to answer, also, because that's where we can make bold bets on the future of food. So, but also thanks for bringing us that example from fashion. And what we want to use this session today is as a safe space where we can discuss how we can do maybe something similar, or if that's not applicable, realize that it's not applicable in this session. So what Clymeet's been doing over the last several months with the support of the Lotus Foundation is we've been talking to companies. Some of them are here, some of them are not here, industry experts, and we've come up with this paper. So it's been led by my colleague, Liane Zeppenfeld, who's a knowledge and collaboration architect. So Liane's going to give you a very brief presentation, just 7 slides, on the highlights of the paper. So over to you, Liane.
Perfect. Okay, hi everyone. So my name is Liane, and like Danush mentioned, I work at Clymeet. And in the past couple of months, we've been talking to a lot of private sector companies, both in kind of the ESG, climate sustainability groups, but also really in the innovation teams. And we've also been talking to experts in the field in research and also other organizations working with private sector to really work on climate issues. So this work is based on those conversations. But why do we need to actually talk about this? I know the slides, maybe you're in front of it, but I'm going to talk you through. So why do we need to talk about this? So like Leslie mentioned, innovation is going to be a key puzzle piece to transform the food system. Of course, it's not the only answer. It's not going to change the world, but it is a very important puzzle piece. And we also see that the private sector role in food and ag innovation is growing, both in absolute and relative terms, but also in the way other either public or philanthropically funded initiatives are kind of targeting private sector investment, kind of unlocking that. So it's also being centralized in other initiatives. But we also know that the private sector can both promote but also undermine transformational change. That can be because of technological lock-ins or path dependence, but also just really because sometimes the incentives just don't add up. So that's why we need to look at it. So in the conversations, a couple of kind of reasons why companies are already working on aligning their innovation pipelines to climate action came up. And one of them is really kind of a high-level business case, which means if you're not changing your products, not innovating on your business models, you're not gonna have a market in the future because climate change is gonna be so fundamentally challenging the food system as we know now. Secondly, there's of course also a regulatory push, which kind of levels up the bottom line of kind of requirements that's forcing companies to innovate. And there's also kind of the reputational risk where we see consumers demanding more climate sensitive products and also asking for more data on that. So companies are doing lots already. There's kind of 3 strategies in which we see that they're trying to align their innovation to climate action. One is kind of gateway alignment, which is, let's say, in innovation pipelines at moments where there's a decision point, making sure there's a climate metric, climate standards, that it's being tested to climate standards, and informing a decision to either move or stop with an innovation. But we tend to see that this is quite at the end of the innovation pipeline, so in that sense it might not be the most fundamental tool to really adjust climate and innovation trajectories. But then we also see that they're adjusting their pipeline. This happens kind of on 2 levels. On the one hand, there's really a change in the strategy, so really aligning your innovation strategy to climate challenges, but also really changing the process. So for example, testing different innovation under different climate scenarios. And so in that sense, really changing how you do your innovation to make sure it aligns to climate action. Then lastly, there's more kind of an application alignment, which in a way is post-innovation pipeline. But it's really about, okay, the innovations and the products that are already there, how can we spend R&D money on kind of figuring out how we can improve practices, but also how can we identify maybe climate benefits that we hadn't identified before. But that's all a lot of work that's going on there. But we also know that there's so much more innovation and possibility to align that to climate action. So what doesn't click yet? One is the very obvious point that in private sector, there needs to be profitability. R&D investments need to have a future in terms of profitability. Then secondly, there's an interesting interaction between competition and accountability. And also, like Leslie mentioned, if you're a private company, are you gonna share your secrets with other companies? Specifically, if there's an increasing demand for greener products, then actually, if you're really good at aligning to climate action, you're not gonna share your secret because you're gonna be able to secure the premium market compared to competitors. So that's a dynamic that we also see. And related to that, also the question of accountability, where there are a lot of metrics and standards, but most of them are hard to verify, which on the one hand makes it hard for governments to really check assumptions and claims from private sector, but it also makes it hard for private sector to really be open about their efforts. Because their claims are not verifiable, there's often also questions around them, which makes it hard for them to defend, let's say. And then lastly, there's kind of the question of, yes, climate is very much in innovation strategies of private sectors. All of the companies we spoke to have some sort of strategy related to climate and innovation. But it's really difficult to figure out how much leverage does that actually have? How does it really shape the outcomes of their innovation pipeline? So we developed an initial set of, let's say, lockpicks to start unlocking those. I'm not going to run through all of them, but for example, for profitability, of course, there's the question of how can we secure and increase profitability. This can be done, for example, through advanced market commitments by public and philanthropic funders, or secure and return on investments, for example, by buying intellectual property rights from companies to make knowledge open access. For competition and accountability, there's definitely a need for a policy push. I know there's a lot of people working on that in the 2 weeks here that we are in Dubai, but there's also, like Leslie mentioned, a really need to convene the private sector pre-competitively. So having a conversation about innovation, best practices for aligning to climate action before this competition dynamic really comes into play. And then on the limited leverage of climate, I'm pretty sure you can't see that, so I'm going to talk you through that one. First, really, we know that building kind of C-level leadership on this topic is fundamental to making sure climate decisions and concerns really inform innovation pipelines. And also, like I mentioned, really consolidating best practices and lessons from the private sector, because in the conversation so far, it's been quite challenging to really tease out what are the best practices for companies to really make sure your innovation is informed by the climate concerns. For example, there have been quite a lot of examples where there are climate experts in the innovation pipeline involved, but okay, that's good, but what do they actually have to say? How much leverage do they actually have on their impact? And then underlying all of these is definitely a need for stronger MRV tools, so measurement, reporting and verification, and exploring even more creative collaboration methods. There are already some good examples, and I think the point of this conversation is also crowdsource some of those conversations. It's a discussion starter, so I hope this will start the discussions we're having here, but also I'm inviting you to reach out, share your lessons, share your examples, share your concerns, questions. We all want to hear it, so we can move forward with this piece. Thanks all.
Thanks, Lian. I got this mic, so we don't have to do that process again. So Lian's here at the COP until the 11th, and she will be around. So if you have comments, you can also just grab her and give her your feedback, and that'll be featured in the next version. So we want to get the discussion going. And to do that, we have this group of people here. So they've been like stuck to their microphone, so that's why they've been sitting here blocking the PowerPoint, but that's not the intention. They were promised coffee, and this was the coffee chat, but there's no coffee. So thanks for your patience and still doing this. Really appreciate it. The idea is an innovation chat, to get into some of the recommendations and broader issues. So to facilitate that and kickstart that, we have Luis Postma here. Louise is a PhD candidate. She's studying the role of agribusinesses in climate adaptation in Africa. So she will be the facilitator, moderator, host of the coffee chat. And together with Louise, we have Bernard Stormer from Yara International. So Yara is the world's largest plant nutrition company. So we want to understand, okay, so at the level of the farmers, how does this thinking on innovation work? So from your side, and then we have Salazar from Polig. Polig is a consumer-facing company. So I just learned yesterday from Salah that the tortilla that I buy in the Netherlands is made by you. So
quite often.
yeah, so they're working with consumers on the product development. So we want to hear the other side of the story. So how do you approach innovation? And to facilitate that, I hand over to you, Louise.
Thank you. And I would first like to really thank also the creation of this discussion piece. I thought it was very interesting. My own research, I think it focuses mostly on risk management innovation. So how are agri-food processing and handling companies, mainly focusing on Africa, how are they perceiving climate risks that emerge at the smallholder level, and how are they managing these risks? Are they already managing the risks? And then we want to see how we can maybe help them to manage the risks in ways that support smallholder adaptation. So investing in smallholder adaptation as a way to manage supply chain risks. What I also really liked that you pointed out was the fact that you have different types of ways of doing research and development. So in-house, external, but also in collaboration. And I was just wondering if Salah could maybe give me some more insight on how you potentially have collaboration with other private companies. I think our keynote speaker already mentioned that it can be quite difficult because, of course, there are R&D secrets. How do you bridge any of those difficulties? What factors are important? How do you build trust?
Yeah. No, that's a good question. Is it okay, the audio, or should I move it? Okay. Yeah, I actually like the categorization as well, to internal, external, and collaboration. And I just to start off at Polig, I would say we actually do all three. So we have our own in-house R&D, where we focus not only on the existing portfolio in terms of how to really tweak, any part of the value chain, whether we do reformulation or other sides of packaging or others. So there are a number of aspects that we focus on there. But of course, looking at what comes next in the pipeline. External piece for us means, for instance, our venturing arm. So we have a separate venturing arm where we can be a bit more explorative in terms of topics that might not be directly related to our current portfolio. And there, the whole venturing arm is actually dedicated to food systems transformation. And it tends to help us to renew our business as well. When it comes to the collaboration piece, that's where we work mostly on specific commodities, soft commodities. So there are different collaboration groups, research groups where we're part of. So let's take an example of coffee, which is about 30% of the business, but it's not all. So we also have a lot of other business areas. But the main commodities are coffee, wheat, and corn, actually. But then we have a long tail of different spices and other nature-related commodities as well. In this collaboration piece, a lot of the joint work focuses on either on resilience, so developing, really looking at which crops could be more resilient in the future. And there is a joint interest for others to explore different varieties, think about different environments where these could be then grown. And then the other piece is on mitigation. It's the practices. So it doesn't make sense. In some cases, yes, you can do it yourselves. But in many cases, it makes sense that you test things together and you define the common metrics to also measure it. Because if we all develop these in our silos, it is even harder to communicate this further in the chain and to our partners. So in many cases, there are collaborations to test farming practices or fertilizer use, what makes sense, what is the impact on soils, how can we then actually measure, when you talk about soil carbon sequestration topics, in different crops. So that makes sense to do in a collaborative setting. Sometimes you might want to apply it in your own setup, but I think the hard piece is then how to start applying that in practice to our own value chains, and we can maybe talk that a little bit further. But I would say for us, it's all those three: a collaboration. Yeah, you just have to find your partners, and usually in the collaboration, it's also, for us, it's important that quite often there might be a public partner as well. So a lot of these collaborations that we are part of, it's not only companies, but it could be research institutions, which we need there, and then it could be piece of publicly funded, like NORAD or GIZ or another, governmental linked institutions. So that's sort of the sweet spot usually in the collaborative R&D.
Great. That's great. So you said that there are challenges mainly in the implementation. Would you mind to share a bit more about
Sure. So I think it's one hand to see what is possible and what are the practices, but then we start talking about in reality in training our farmers. We usually work with traders who have on-ground staff. We have the agronomists on staff and the staff on ground to verify and train everyone. And there usually they're quite long projects, so then it needs some time to really start changing the practices. That doesn't happen overnight. And usually that means extra costs when we talk about switching fertilizers or different use of fertilizers. It needs a premium. So we do have another lockpick for that ourselves. So we've have a so-called climate fund, which is a ring-fenced fund, which we intend to target to really apply some of the practices, the newer practices, the better practices, by paying a premium for the farmers for some of that product, at least for a while, hoping that then we can scale it up, we can apply it for the rest of the quantities that we buy, for instance, from the same trader or same supply chain partner. But it's important to take the risk. I think we heard it from the first speaker. Someone needs to be courageous, and someone does need to take the risk, because in some of these cases we didn't have a buyer yet. We didn't know that the customer eventually is willing to pay for more, but we did it anyway, and we've decided that this is the way to go. It's the only way to go, by the way, for us right now, to make sure that we do meet our targets. Which is we're aiming for 50% reduction in our value chain emissions by 2030. So that's the way to go. But we are waiting for results in some of these. It takes a while. Yeah.
It takes time.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. I think one of the other difficulties in relation to collaboration is actually maybe collaboration within people in your own company. And there, what I also always feel is that it might be actually very difficult for a very ambitious company to sell their ideas that they develop in research and development to their shareholders. And I was just wondering, Bernard, what do you think about that, and how you balance the focus on profitability with climate goals, and also maybe if you want to highlight some of the areas where those two go hand in hand.
Thanks, and it's really a pleasure to be here for this important discussion. And I feel that this is spot on for Yara as a company. Going back to Lian's presentation, what is really the innovation driver for Yara? I would say that we have climate embedded into decision gates, but there's the real drive for innovation in Yara is that the CEO has set an ambition for the company, which is growing a nature-positive food future. And by nature positive, we also mean climate neutral. We don't know how to deliver on that ambition. That is why we need to innovate in order to deliver on our strategic ambition. But how come a company such as Yara could make such a bold ambition statement? This builds on a history. As an example, we developed and introduced to the market 24 years ago precision farming technology. It's sensor equipment for farmers' tractors, meaning that they can more accurately dose the fertilizer according to the crop requirements. So we are helping the farmers to use less of our products so that the farmers can get both a lower carbon footprint on the crop, reduce the risk of losses of nutrients to the environment, while getting a higher return on investment. Why do we do this? We do this because we become more competitive. We could become a more attractive partner to the farmers. So this is how we can compete in a business as unusual way. So this is all built on a improved efficiency logic. We also did in-house innovation to reduce our own product carbon footprint. So we pioneered carbon footprint labeling of our products in the market. This was 2012, so a few years ahead of the Paris Agreement. That wasn't a huge commercial success. People didn't buy our products because of the reduced carbon footprint labeling, but it was a door opener. It was something that attracted interest. So this was something we saw that we could build on and develop further and to make a commercial lever. And we are these days entering into commercial contracts on basis of enabling a reduced carbon footprint on the produce. So I think the important thing is to have a compelling thinking and strategy that showcases how you can make business out of this over the long run. But obviously, you need to make that happen in a credible way so that we do, example given, external assurance, we have a third-party verification of labeling, etc., etc. But I think the key part here is really how you can work together. And we want to work with the farmers, but the farmers are, of course, businessmen and women themselves, so that we need examples such as what you mentioned, Salah. So there's a off-taker, a food company on the other end that shows a real interest for making this whole change and the transition happen.
Okay. Yeah, and if I may add on that, of course, there's an element of trying to develop the market. So at the same time, of course, we are a consumer-facing a company, so we have that interface. So we are trying to raise awareness on the attributes, whether it's on climate or other nature topics. Or other benefits or health benefits. And so we are working together with the industry, by the way, to develop on food labeling and credible, aligned messaging. So it wouldn't be confusing for consumer, but really something to guide them and help make informed decisions. So, but that also is a long road. But I think that companies like ours, we do have a responsibility to try to do that as well. And then giving another example. I used to work for another great company, DSM-Firmenich, and they had a lot of these innovations. They had, climate-induced innovation programs, and there were a few cases where something was delivered 15 years ago. For instance, this methane inhibitor called Povar, and there were absolutely no markets. No one wanted it, so they were really banging the doors of the farmer and then the regulators, or who really takes the first steps and who will be the courageous one. And then through all these avenues, but also raising awareness of the issue of methane, why it is such a potent greenhouse gas and why it needs to be addressed now, then slowly, not only, of course, due to our efforts at the time, but from other fronts as well, raising the awareness, raising the issue as it is, helped to create the market. So I think there are different avenues to do that. And as a consumer company, this is what we try to do as well, raise the awareness of choices of your consumption as well. Yeah.
Okay, that's super interesting. And I just remembered that Leanne, she told that there are three main reasons why companies align their innovation pipelines to climate action. And one of them is reputational risk. So I was just wondering, does this mean that right now you are not really facing a reputational risk from consumers? And I was also wondering, are there other stakeholders or shareholders where you are facing a reputational risk if you don't invest in climate action? Is it maybe the people here in the room, or is it maybe your own employers that want you to do this, or your shareholders? What are your views on that? Maybe you can start.
I would point at investors as one of the key stakeholders, because our investors are really banging at our door and asking us, where are your science-based targets? What is your plan to transition the company? Are you fit for the future? And that is also an important basis for our whole strategy. We want to not just to be fit for the future, but we want to drive that transition, and we want to make money out of it. Because Salah's company and other companies and farmers will have to adapt to this. And if we can have the solutions ready when the market needs it, we are going to be a more profitable company.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, maybe similarly, I think it's all of the stakeholders you mentioned. For us, it's a little different. We are still a family-owned company, so we are not listed company. We're quite big, but we're not listed, so that gives a different sort of space. But we, of course, we operate in the same market, so we, of course, do the same things. We've been around for 150 years almost. That means we've seen quite a lot of transitions along the way, and we've had different businesses. So we, for instance, had a plant-based protein business at the time, and there have been different avenues to do that. And I think you said it yourself, the leadership, not only from CEO, but really from broad leadership base for us in the case of owners, the steer to make sure that we are future-proofing the company. And that often is delivered through having those metrics. We also have science-based targets, which is then cascaded to everything we do in both of our own R&D, but also how we approach M&As or how we approach then the incubator venturing arm, as I mentioned. So that helps having that. I think we talked in a previous event about a compass, having that compass and sort of what is the filter and screen that you drive all your actions through. And then you realize that there are only certain avenues you can take. You can't really divert too much, otherwise you won't be meeting your targets and the vision, the leadership vision either. But I would say for us, the customers, the consumers, also the employees, they are really important stakeholders in driving this.
Great, thank you. Yeah, so in my own research, I'm also looking at why companies are making which decisions on risk management. And then if you look at risk management in their own value chain related to smallholder vulnerability, there are three strategies. Either they do nothing, which is maybe because they don't know or because the risks are not high enough to make investments profitable. They can change their supply chain, so go to different areas, expand it maybe to include more farmers, or focus on a small amount of farmers and help them to scale up. But those types of changes, they don't benefit most of the smallholder farmers, because for most of them that means that their market will become less secure or it will disappear at all. So the third one is investing in these smallholders, and then we're also trying to identify like what influences are there from outside, like markets, financial influences, governance, governments, regulations, but also these consumers, like do they even have anything already that they have to say on this topic, or is this still emerging? And I think that is maybe also the difficulty with this third reason for investing in climate as part of your innovation pipeline is that the consumers are becoming more aware, but it will take a couple of seasons for it to get to a high point, and we just don't have those seasons basically. So it's great to hear that shareholders and investors are actually also knocking on the doors. That is great. No.
It's not directly climate related, but there's a small anecdote I like to share. And several years ago, one of our country managers in a sub-Saharan African country was in a dialogue with the government about a fertilizer subsidy program. And our manager's message to the government was that they were way too ambitious, that they shouldn't make the fertilizer as cheap as they intended. The government went ahead with the program. The farmers bought a lot of fertilizers. They had bumper crops the next year, but the result was that the local market was oversupplied, prices collapsed, maize was rotting in the fields, the farmers were no better off. So this is just to illustrate why we tend to work in value chain collaborations when we want to do interventions with smallholder farmers, because we want to make sure that there is a market if we help them to improve their productivity levels. And of course, there is a link between climate change and productivity in agriculture, even if it's an indirect one. But maybe the best example of working in collaboration is the Farm-to-Market Alliance, where the World Food Programme is the ultimate guaranteed off-taker of the produce. But we have several such collaborations where we come together and make an interventions around the supply shed of a produce with smallholder farmers.
Okay, thank you. And I just would like to open it up now to the public. If there are any questions, please raise your hand and you'll be handed a microphone. I see a question right there. Yeah.
Thank you so much. I think it is a very amazing topic. I have three questions. The first question, how we can build the trust with the government and the private sector? Because we know that policies, strategies, and everything goes through the government. The second point, is there any standards or measures? Because this innovation divided into two. One, it is a nature friendly and safe, very safe, but we know that some innovations and some researches, they use things that may be not safe to the human beings. Is there any measures to adjust this or to manage this? The third point also, I asked the private sector if they use the innovations which created by the indigenous people, because sometimes indigenous people, they have good knowledge and it needs to be advanced and to be developed. Thank you.
Thank you. Maybe we can get another question before going to the answers.
All right. Okay. Thank you very much for the presentations and the discussions as well. My name is Chaturuka Silosius. I'm from Zimbabwe. Yes, I've got a question relating to the balance between agricultural subsidies and the market prices and welfare of the farmers. Because I've seen many times in Africa, we tend to give out these subsidies. But at the end, for sure, the welfare is not improving as anticipated. But at the same time, the very same farmers, they are not able to buy the inputs. So how do we strike a balance to ensure that we get food security and at the same time, we also do not send out the farmers out of the farming business?
Okay, thank you very much for the two questions. Would any one of you like to start?
Yeah, I'd love to get started. So maybe bundling the trust question with the subsidy question. I think first and foremost, we need to talk together. We need the experts from the government level and the expert from the private sector, and also with the NGOs and with the farmers themselves, not least the farmers themselves, to come together and talk and exchange views and share the knowledge. If we don't talk together, I don't think we are able to build trust. And without trust, I don't think we're able to do effective problem solving. I think there will always have to be a balance in between how you can subsidize food production and the markets. I don't think there is something as one exactly right way of doing this. So I don't have any other answer to that than sitting together and discussing what is if you consider the nutrient requirements from a country, how much nutrients do you need to put into agriculture, and what can come from natural sources, and what must come from input from companies such as ours. And when it comes to the natural sources of nutrients coming to the indigenous peoples part of the question, for us, we are embracing regenerative agriculture as part of our strategy going forward. Regenerative ag is not something that comes natural for a mineral fertilizer company. So this is something where we need to learn from others how this is being done. And indigenous peoples can certainly be one of those sources of inspiration. We are still working to wrap our heads around how to make regenerative agriculture part of our strategy and our deliverables, so we don't have a full answer to that just yet.
And maybe add on that, on how to really involve the indigenous people and the people on the ground. And I think, Bernard, you already mentioned it. For us, also all of these projects that I mentioned, where we are really focusing on reducing the impacts or improving the resilience, they are designed locally, because on regenerative agriculture, it's not one size fits all. So I think that's one of the key learnings. And of course, in that case, you really have to understand the local context. You have to understand. You have to have people on the ground. It's not something that comes top down, but it's really developed together in the region, and it needs to fit for the region. Quite often the starting points are different, the conditions are different, so you really have to develop the project quite detailed, and that also takes time and takes resources. That's why the scaling of regenerative practices is quite slow in some cases, and you can't really consider it as a silver bullet or buy a magic wand and then things are resolved. But it does need the local expertise and understanding. But also the courage from both sides to try something new, right? Even things have been done in a certain way for quite a long time.
Yeah, thank you. And if I just may add on the trust question, I think that it just takes a lot of investment, right? So it needs time. And what I also see often is that when parties start collaborating, the first or the second thing that they do is ask for money. And that doesn't work. And the other thing that I notice is that people have their own projects and they're very proud of their own projects, and I think for very good reasons. But sometimes you need to make collaborations and embrace projects of other people that work better, that you can scale up, and let go of what you have been working on, even though that sometimes might be a bit difficult. So we have room for one or two more questions. So I see first here the lady Bruce, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so we're moving really slowly to a climate-friendly world, and both from a production side and a consumption side. And it seems like this whole pre-competitive thing should really be ramped up significantly. I'm wondering, do we have any answers how we can really ramp up pre-competitive innovation?
Then there's a lady in the back.
Thank you to our presenter for very informative presentations. So the question is, by and large, there is always a trade-off between making the best return on the investment to keep your company ahead of competition and going greener. So how do you really deal and balance that contradiction or that kind of a trade-off between the two? Going greener and making best return on the investment. Secondly, innovation in most of the time means bringing some changes or adjustment. And as we know, along the value chain, we are having a lot of actors. And what one actor do eventually affect another actor, being upstream of the segment or on the bottom of the segment. So how do you make sure that if you bring any change or adjustment, you are not affecting any one of the actor in the entire value chain segments? Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that question. We had another one here, please.
Hi, and thank you, Leslie, for inviting me. I'm Valeria Ramundo Orlando. We have a fund that invests in climate adaptation. And we traditionally do not invest in food systems, but we do look at livelihoods, and we do look at food after and post climate shocks. So I've heard a lot about resilience, but my question is, are you looking at resilience and food security? Meaning, what are going to be the risks of extreme heat, of flooding in agriculture, where margins are already very, very small? And what we have found is that innovation is very, very expensive. And linking back to what Leslie was saying is that without concessionary capital going in to truly innovate is going to be very, very challenging. So if you could share what kind of innovation for climate resilience you've been doing would be great. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for the questions. So we have 1.5 minutes or less left. I would like to the question of the lady in the back I find very interesting, and I was wondering, do you have, for example, because companies, of course, you're working with financial figures. Do you have, for example, a share of your margin that you're allowed to lose to reach your climate goals? Or how do you work with that, internally? So maybe you can reflect on that and as well as the other questions being asked.
Yeah, happy to start. When we do the green transition, we start at the pilot scale. So we are investing some tens of millions, and then we secure niche market contracts with higher premiums for those niches. Meaning for the smaller adjustments, we can take a higher risk. If and when it works, we can increase the investments and we can start scaling up. This leads us, of course, to what you said, Bruce, that we are moving way too slowly into the green transition. So we we need this to happen faster, and I think collaboration is one way of making that happen faster. And I think an underexploited area is business model innovation. So how can you make the whole value chain respond in conjunction, in a coordinated way, rather than having one stakeholder at a time, taking cautious steps to avoid risk and trying to move into the green transition. We have some examples of that, but we need to make that a lot more effective and efficient.
Yeah, and just to maybe build on that, for us it's the same. We have a lot of CapEx investments in transforming our assets and then how we produce and what do we produce. But then I go back to the fund because that's, at the end of the day, that's a little bit the risk part there. It's ring-fenced money, which we've tied to our emissions reduction targets. So we are increasing the money to the fund based on how we are looking at our roadmap on our emissions reductions to go. And it's based on our internal carbon price of 50 euro per ton. And that's how we then allocate the money to the fund. It's not charity though, so we do expect that we do see the results in the products and in the, eventually at the customer end. But right now, that's sort of the risk profile that we can publicly share from that perspective.
Great,
Yeah.
thank you. And then with that, I would like to hand back to Danush for the next part of the session.
Louise, thanks Bernard, thanks Hala. That was really interesting discussion, and I think we can continue maybe over lunch or coffee if it's available in the end. But thank you so much. I learned a lot from this interesting discussions. But we've had the paper, we've had the experience from Leslie from the fashion industry, we've had these experience from industry, Louise's work from her PhD research. Now we want to kind of distill the key messages from all of this conversation. And for that, I'd like to invite the next speaker, Puri Mehta from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. And the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation is the largest investor in agriculture innovation. I read that you invest 10 times more than the next foundation. So I'm really curious, Purvi, about your reflections. But I also really like it, last COP, we were talking about innovation. And you pointed out that it's not just technology, it's also about the social and institutional dimensions. So over to you, if you may come to the podium. Yeah. You have a microphone there.
Thank you, Danush. Sitting here, Leslie, I must tell you, I am one of those who go to a lot of agriculture meetings all the time. And this is one of the first time I saw a comparison between fashion and agriculture. Thank you for bringing some glamour to our world. But it's very interesting. These two may be seemingly very, very different, but I think we also have a lot of commonalities. And as you were speaking, I was thinking we also have trends, right? We also have seasonalities. We also have up season and down season, right? And our trends are changing with climate. The way the farmers have been growing, the way the farmers have to respond to the market, the way the consumers are changing, the food patterns are changing, and that this is basically what we call as the need for food transformation, right? This is, we've been talking about this for a very long time. We've been talking about transformative ideas for a very long time. And interestingly, as we speak about climate, for example, it is not that there is not much happening. There is a lot happening, including in terms of the climate finance, right? I mean, if one looks at last 2-3 years of trend, in last 2 years, over 90% of the new money that has come in agriculture has been in the space of climate. So it's a good trend. I mean, just if you look at one continent, Africa, the amount of money that was mobilized in terms of climate last 1 year was close to $27 to $28 billion. I am not saying it is enough. There is so much more needed. There are huge gaps there, but $27, $28 billion is not a trivial amount of money. where does private sector play a role in this entire thing is something that's going to be very, very important. At the moment, mainly the private sector, which is, Dhanush, you said it's about 13 billion. It's the overall investments into innovation. But if one double clicks on climate-related investments by private sector, especially for developing countries, it is close to 12 to 14%, right? Which is not enough. So I think private sector's role in two ways. Number one is in bridging the climate, especially adaptation finance gap, but at the same time, private sector's role in leveraging the adaptation finance that is being generated. I think both ways it is very, very important, right? And especially in adaptation, very important because adaptation is the field where there will be a lot of opportunities, right? I want to just give one example, which is, say, for example, with the agriculture system transformation, one of the things that we'll have to transform is what the farmers are growing, or more diversified commodities. Diversification within the varieties of the same rice and same wheat and same maize, and also diversified commodities to different other commodities, right? And so, for example, Bruce, I know when you led CCAF, there was a lot of work on this kind of thing. Rice, for example, right, or maize, for example, we have historically concentrated on varieties which have been high yielding, right? Because quantity of food was very important to the world. And we have not really done a lot of selection process due to, with the varieties which are more climate adaptive, for example, better water efficient, better so thermostability, those kind of things, right? And so there is tremendous opportunities in bringing private sector in sort of identifying and scaling and Leslie, to your point, profitability in some of these varieties. So two quick points I'd like to make. Number one is when I look at private sector, I do not look at it only as a corporate social responsibility type social work that the private sector does, which it does very well. But I think profitability in the whole adaptation lens, I think is very, very important, and to see the opportunity areas. Number two, I also want to remind that no matter what we say, and with apologies to the private sector that's here, no matter what we say, the largest investor, and that also is private sector, the largest investor in agriculture, especially developing country agriculture, will remain the big private sector, which is the farmer themselves. They are the biggest risk takers, they are the biggest investors, and they have the highest stake on ground. And therefore, I think when we talk about private sector, let's not just talk about the companies, very, very important, but at the same time also looking at it from an investor, which is the farmer perspective. So thanks again, and congratulations again, Dhanush, on climate, bringing this to our agenda. Thank you.
Thank you, Purvi. And thanks to all the speakers and contributors. I don't have anything more to add, but my big reflection is like, we are here at the Food Systems Pavilion. Food systems is the buzzword. It's going everywhere, There's a Food Systems Declaration, which is great. But it also reminded me, this discussion, we can think in terms of systems, but we need to operationalize in terms of very specific technical areas, working on the consumer side, the production side, or fashion side. We need like work packages which are connected to the food systems dialogue and debate and concept, but we need to get it actionable, we need to get it into smaller pieces that we can digest. Thanks, everyone, and I wish you all a good rest of your day. We have more events. Do join us if you're available and interested.